Christ is risen indeed. Alleluia. Those are the words that we've already said, the words that we say every Easter, and we'll say them again at the end of our service. But at this time, in spring 2020, we have to say, well, for me anyway, these words aren't really bubbling up and bursting out with joy like usual. Right now, to be honest, it feels like our lives are more dwelling in the pain and the separation of Good Friday and Holy Saturday, when we're suffering, dying, watching death unfold, and then bereft in grief. It's a strange time then to be rejoicing and saying, Alleluia. And yet, Christians as we are, while our heart may not feel it, we know in our head and in our gut that Christ is risen. And so we do declare it today. So what does this mean? So what, you might say? So what if God is so amazing that he comes back to life? He's God after all, isn't he? Well, this is where our reading from St. Paul's comes in, which says, you have been raised with Christ. So the resurrection wasn't just a historical event. The resurrection is something that reveals the reality of life and death. The reality that there is life beyond the grave. The reality that death doesn't have the final word. The reality that even if we are separated from our loved ones who have died, they are not separated from the one of love. The reality that when we die, it is not the end. We will never be separated from love. Never be separated from God. There is life after death. In our current secular society, putting this out there, what we believe, can seem a bit risky. It might make us seem strange, weird, probably deluded. But today of all days, Easter Day, is the day when we are called to put ourselves on the line and say, okay, I admit it. I believe in the resurrection. I believed I am raised with Christ and there is life after death. This isn't a cosy message, is it? It's not about chicks and rabbits. They are cute, and I do love a good Easter egg hunt, which I've already done with my kids this morning. But as Christians, this message is a stark one. Yeah, it is. It's a message that faces death, that looks it in the eye and says, you, death, are not the worst thing that can happen to us. And you might find, like I do, afterwards, after you've looked death in the face and said this, there is a kind of joy and a lightness and a hope that comes. Now, to be clear, we're not being deluded or burying our heads in the sand, and we're not forcing a false hope. We weep with Mary of Magdala as we think about death. We stand weeping outside the tomb with Mary, with those who have loved ones ill and dying in care homes, like in Hawthorne Green in East London. We weep and bend over with Mary as she looks in the tomb, like the family breaking down that toilet door to hear their father's last rasping breath. We are crying, weeping, despairing with Mary and all others around the world right now. But then, like Mary, we hear our name called. Jesus said to her, "Mary," and she turned. Mary turns. She turns from dark to light, from death to life. She turns from despair to hope. Mary's turning is what we need to do today. We're facing death, aren't we? We're facing horror and illness and isolation and despair, a future unknown, even with potential crash of the economy and people dying on us. Then someone says her name. Mary. Mary turns from staring into a morbid staring into death and decline and misery and loss and grief, and she turns. She turns to hope and joy and life. A lot of us struggle to believe this, me included. We look at death and then we can't look away, and we can't take the moment to hear our voice being called, to turn and to look at life. But God is calling. But this day, this is the day we commit to look into the far horizon, to look at the dawn that will break, to look for a hope that will come, knowing Christ is risen. Love is stronger than death. Love is stronger than everything, and love never ends. Let's look to see this, and all we need to do is take one step towards the one of love. The one of love then will embrace us. Mary turned from death to life. It's time we did the same. Alleluia, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia.